Hey everyone, it's Natalie. If you were hoping my days of hosting the No-Till Market Garden podcast were over, you are out of luck. I'm still here. I'm just resigned to the fact that this may be a 100% congested season for me. I think a lot of you out there are also dealing with a lot of sickness. I had COVID 3 weeks ago and it just lingers. I was actually in the thick of it when I recorded this interview with my dear friend and soil scientist, Deirdre Griffin LaHue. Maybe because of my COVID haze or because I wanted to focus more on things she's doing currently, I completely forgot to ask her about her experience as the national soil judging champion when she was an undergrad at the University of Maryland. Soil judging, for those of you who've never heard of it, is about as nerdy as you can get in the world of soil morphology and pedology. So you get a certain amount of time in a soil pit, and you have to define the horizons or layers of soil, doing texture by feel, identifying color and structure, determining the taxonomy and functionality of the soil. I never did it, but there was a really strong tradition of soil judging at the University of Maryland where Deirdre and I met. And I think it's rare that we actually, dig up the pit in the soil unless we're putting in a foundation or creating a road. And I feel like because of that, a lot of us interact with mostly surface soil, but the subsurface horizons going down quite deep in some places play a really important role in how a soil behaves to support plants and deal with water. And also scientists are looking a lot more at these deeper soil layers for how they contribute to the carbon cycle on Earth. Those deeper soil layers and, getting into a pit is really eye-opening. And you get to see how all these different parent materials, that's basically soil speak for rocks or transported materials like windblown loess, how they weather to create the incredible diversity of soils that we have on this planet, but even just within a small region like the state of Maryland. So to be national champion, Deirdre had to excel at climbing down into soil pit and really just reading the history of a soil. So I wish we had gotten a chance to talk about that. We didn't, but I did just want to, say that we were talking with a national champion, like the varsity level of soil science. One of my favorite memories with her is when we were out on the eastern shore of Maryland digging holes with an auger to characterize the soil for one of my field experiments. And I know that a lot of agricultural scientists don't do this. They just base where they place their experiments on sort of historic observation of crop performance. But like the tradition of soil judging at Maryland, the practice of doing this was pretty ingrained, at least with my advisor. So we'd auger a bunch of holes down to a meter or so. And in one spot, just as we were about as far down as we could go, we hit a dark soil that looked an awful lot like another A horizon or surface soil full of this dark organic matter. So the soil on top had formed from loess, which had blown in from somewhere else and had been weathering in place. So it's not out of the question that it had formed on top of another fully formed soil. I've been on farms where the farmer discovered someone had brought in fill and the real A horizon was buried a foot below the soil surface. But this felt different because we had just dug through thousands of years of history and weathering to find a buried soil. It was kind of like finding a fossil or something. One other quick memory with Deirdre while I'm being nostalgic. We were out in a different field near Beltsville, Maryland, and I looked over and I saw her hair was just sticking straight up, which is, not a great time to be out in the field wielding a metal auger or whatever tools we were working with. So we hopped in the car. Not before taking pictures, of course. And on that note, you may have noticed that following a lightning storm, your crops really perk up. And some of that is certainly probably because of the water that comes with the thunderstorm. But did you know that lightning contributes quite a bit of nitrate, which gets into the precipitation and can give your crops a little nitrogen boost? One final thing, and then I'll get to this conversation with Deirdre about her work in Washington State. I want to thank my husband for building me a little closet desk and recording studio for doing these interviews. I'm sitting there now on this rainy morning before the sun has come up, and it's very cozy. Yeah, sitting on the floor was really unsustainable, so thank you. I hope you all have a happy and healthy new year. Thanks for listening.
Today's episode of the No-Till Market Garden Podcast is brought to you by Farmer's Friend. In a world where the threat of food insecurity is quickly becoming the new norm, Farmer's Friend exists to equip, educate, and inspire growers to change the world through regenerative agriculture. Small farms are the future, and the future is now. If you need quality tools and supplies for your vegetable or flower operation, check out their growing selection of innovative and affordable tunnels, tools, tarps, and much more. Here at my home farm, we rely heavily on Farmer's Friend for our production. We have 3 of their caterpillar tunnels. We use the silage tarps for occultation. Their row covers have gotten us through hard winters. And of course, the quick cut greens harvester has sped up our baby greens harvest tremendously. Visit farmersfriend.com/no-till today. That's farmersfriend.com/no-till, or visit the link in the show notes and get free shipping on your entire order. Today's episode is also brought to you by Certified Naturally Grown. Hey, sustainability nerds, if you run your farm with a high value on soil health, input reduction, and environmental impact, chances are you've thought about certification. Certified Naturally Grown is a farmer-to-farmer certification that demonstrates your commitment to ecological methods while keeping costs low and paperwork to a minimum, meaning you have more time to do the work you really love. This peer review model supports regional knowledge exchange and strengthens local farming networks. See why hundreds of farmers are choosing CNG. Find out more and apply at naturallygrown.org. That's naturallygrown.org. All right, enjoy the show.
So, welcome. Let's just start with introductions. Who are you? What do you do? How'd you get there? Why did you get interested in agriculture and soil science in the first place? And if you don't say it was because of me, it's okay.
Actually, that is part of a big part of my journey. So I am Deirdre Griffin LaHue. I am an assistant professor at Washington State University focused on soil quality and sustainable soil management. And I'm located at one of WSU's 4 research and extension centers. So I'm in Western Washington at the WSU Mount Vernon Northwestern Washington Research and Extension Center. And how did I get here? It's been a meandering journey. I am originally from Maryland and didn't grow up in agriculture at all, and had a previous career in ballet. So, did science in high school, but didn't really have a big plan of being a scientist. And then through my ballet career, I got really interested in nutrition science. And I also, as a side job, worked in a restaurant that was very focused on vegan and vegetarian diets and how food production interacts with the environment. So when I decided to take a break from ballet, I started at University of Maryland in nutrition science, and then realized I was more interested in the kind of studying the food production aspect of things and focused on environmental science and agriculture, and ended up working in a soil science lab and got to work with this grad student, Natalie, who was...
I've heard about her.
Yeah, she...
Notorious.
I don't know, it was honestly a very important experience.
A lot of hazing. A lot of
digging up forage radish in the winter and washing it in the field in 30-degree conditions. No, but I mean, it exposed me to field research and, how to ask questions that would be important to farmers and then think of the methods that we would use to address them. And it was really eye-opening and really fun. So after undergrad, I knew that I wanted to go into grad school and get a degree in soil science. So I went to UC Davis for both my master's and PhD focused on soils and biogeochemistry, and worked in systems out in California, mostly in processing tomato systems, and looking at how different soil management practices influence the soil and crop yields and the economics of the system. And then I got my job here. I've been here almost 5 years now at WSU.
Wow. I learned something
Yeah.
about you. I don't think I knew that you started in nutrition.
Yeah, I did. My first semester at Maryland, I was a nutrition science major, and yeah, it was great. But then I kind of didn't. I think it was a good introduction to this topic, and then I realized maybe that's not quite the road I want to like keep going down. But it's fun now because I'm involved in some projects that are really focused on nutritional outcomes of the crops, and so it's cool to be part of projects that still have that end goal of creating more nutritious crops and increasing availability of nutritious crops.
Oh, nice. I definitely want to get back to that. Yeah. And once I feel like once you fell in love with a West Coaster, I knew you were never coming. I knew you were never coming back east, but it's okay.
You and my mom knew I was never coming back east.
Yeah, so now you're in Washington, and you're really lucky because it's a state that has put a lot of effort into soil health, including passing some of the most extensive soil health legislation I've ever heard of or read. I know a lot of states have been working on sort of acknowledging soil for its importance, but Washington like really went for this impressive soil health legislation. I'm wondering if you could tell me a little more about what's happening in Washington. How does that affect your work with farmers, and what does that legislation mean?
Yeah, it is really exciting, and it was a really really exciting time to come here and to start my job. Yeah, so the Washington Soil Health Initiative was passed originally in 2020 and then fully in 2021. And it is a collaboration between Washington State University, the Washington State Department of Agriculture, and the Washington State Conservation Commission. So it's really this tri-agency collaboration that allows us to address, put a lot of effort into research, outreach, and policy. So I think, some other initiatives that have gone on in other states have been maybe more focused on one or the other. But yeah, it's really exciting to be part of this initiative. And so some of the ways that I'm involved in it are WSU has, well, first we did a road mapping process in 2020, 2019. And we kind of categorized the state into different industries or cropping systems and really tried to do a needs assessment and really figure out, what are the concerns that all of these different industries or stakeholders have? Where do they want to be in 5, 10, 15 years? And what are the things we need to do to address that? So that was really the first effort I was involved in. And that's been published. It's accessible online, the Washington Soil Health Roadmap. And then we have also established a network of long-term agricultural research and extension sites, or LTARs, as we're calling them. And I am co-leading one of those here in Mount Vernon. So we were the first site to get established. And basically, it's a fairly large-scale rotational experiment where we have a farmer advisory committee that has guided, which practices, which aspects do we really need to focus on in that, and they've helped us design it. And the hope is that those will be funded in, long term, and then we can get additional funding to, create these research hubs, bringing together a lot of different researchers to look at these systems and help address some of the mechanistic questions about soil health. So that's really exciting, and there's going to be 6 different sites across the state in different climates and cropping systems. And then another big effort that I'm involved in is
can I interrupt you for a sec?
Yeah,
Sorry.
absolutely.
So that's really cool because it's very hard in the kind of short-term funding landscape to get these long-term trials funded and established and then continue, because it's expensive to maintain those kind of experiments. So it's really awesome that you get to help design that and work on that kind of in perpetuity. And I'm wondering, we can circle back to it, but just sort of like, what are some of the things that are really hard to study if you're only doing short-term trials?
Yeah, so it is really hard. If you're lucky, generally you might get a 4 or 5 year grant from USDA, and that's great. But a lot of times, even in a 4 or 5 year grant, you might only do 3 years of a field trial, and soil is really slow to change, and it can be hard to actually quantify changes with certain practices in that time frame. So it is really valuable, and this funding does allow us to. It doesn't fund a lot of research, but it allows us to have the site and maintain it and farm it, and then we can, like I said, we can apply for other grants and kind of leverage what we have. So some things that are challenging to measure in the short term are, changes to soil physical properties, for example. Some soil properties are very dynamic. You might see a change, like, microbial communities, you might see a change fairly quickly, but some other things like aggregate stability or infiltration rates or soil porosity just might take longer to change. And so, and those are really, they're important in a lot of places, but where I'm located, we have a lot of issues with drainage in the winter, and then a lot of issues with soil moisture in the summer. So those are, those physical properties are really important. Also, things like compaction are a big issue here. And, I think an advantage of our site too is we've really tried to design it so that we can use fairly full scale equipment, because if we're, trying to look at issues of compaction, but we're using, if we have really small plots and we're using small scale equipment, we're not really mimicking what the farmers are doing.
That's a really good point.
This larger scale. It's large scale for us. It's a 16-acre trial, and each individual plot is about 1/5 of an acre. So, maybe small for some growers, but large for us. Also, just looking at yields over time. We want to be able to track yields and the economics of the system over time. And also, maybe in 5 years, we'll be able to apply less fertilizer to some of our treatments, and being able to kind of track that and track how inputs might change is really valuable also.
And you're only going to get so many, if you only have 3 or 4 seasons, there's only 3 or 4 weather patterns. But if you have 30 and you're really interested in questions of resilience, which it seems like, we need to be looking at more, then you need those longer term trials. You're making me I'm feeling like a tinge of guilt or shame, because when you mentioned the field scale equipment, because I have a research project now, and we're looking at interseeding cover crops. Mm-hmm. And we interseeded them, and they're doing great. And then we were like, okay, how are we going to harvest this corn? And we're like, if we come in with a chopper, it's going to crush our cover crops. And then we won't know how the cover crops did. And so we ended up, which is a reality of like interseeding, you're still going to have to come in and harvest your corn. So we do need to, work on that. But we ended up harvesting our corn by hand.
Sometimes you got to do what you got to do. But it's really good too to, it's so easy for me as a soil scientist to be like, oh, well, these are the practices that farmers should implement or could implement. And then when we're actually trying to try them out and manage these trials, it's like, oh no, that's not possible. Like, for example, we were trying to no-till drill in cover crops after corn. And it was like, well, there's just so much residue. Like, it's not even, So I think, and we've hired a local farmer who's semi-retired to kind of help manage our trial and help make some of those decisions. So it's been a really great process too, of kind of learning more about what's actually feasible or what might need to be tweaked. But it's challenging.
Yeah. So what's the other part of I interrupted you, how the Soil Health Initiative changes your work?
Yeah. So another big project I've been involved in is what we call the State of the Soils Assessment, which is a project where we're sampling across the state. We have almost 1,000 sites that we've sampled now. So this is across cropping systems, across the climate zones in the state. And one of the objectives of this is to really understand how climate, soil, inherent soil properties, cropping systems are affecting soil health indicators. So, we have all these indicators that we use, kind of like vital signs of the soil, that get at different functions of what we look for from healthy soils. And, there's been a lot of work done in other parts of the country to establish soil health scoring curves. So a farmer could send in a soil and say, okay, well, compared to 5,000 other sites in my region, this is where I kind of rank for a particular indicator. But there's not as much information on that in the Western US. And so we're trying to establish this database for Washington so that we just can get a better idea of, what ranges of values we expect from various indicators, like, different carbon pools. We have some soils in the state that are just inherently very low carbon. They're very dry soils naturally, they're very sandy. So we're, if we can get to 1% carbon, that's an achievement. Whereas in another area that might be, considered like a failing score. So that's one goal. And then we're also collecting management information from all of these sites. So we have a 5-year management history. So we can look at things like tillage intensity ratings and how those might interact with these indicator measurements or crop diversity indices, to understand a little bit more about how management practices in the state, like which ones are being used and how they are affecting these soil health outcomes.
Nice. And so I did have a question here. I Googled you and I kept finding these articles that were like, Dr. Deirdre Griffin LaHue is sampling this field and this field and this field. And so I was wondering how many samples approximately you've pulled yourself, and how many you have made your underlings do. And then I was also wondering if you could just, I do not know that much about Washington agriculture. So if you could just kind of give us a agricultural tour of the state.
Yeah, it's a pretty amazing state. So yeah, I'll start with your first question. And so for this whole project in general, we have 974 sites that have been sampled. I did not I only did a portion of those. And I'll mention that this is a close collaboration with the State Department of Ag. So Dr. Danny Gilardi, she's the senior soil scientist at the State Department of Ag. And we collaborate really closely on this project. It started as a kind of a pilot study where we were focused just on particular specialty crops in the state. And so we started sampling in 2020. It was an interesting time to start sampling. But I was involved in pretty much every sampling effort that summer. We were particularly focused that summer on potato systems. There's a huge potato industry in Washington state. And then wine grape systems were another particular focus that year. And so, yeah, it was really cool to, be driving around the state. We were all in separate vehicles, of course, because it was prime COVID time. And we were rolling around to these different fields and talking with the farmers and sampling. And then I've had 2 graduate students on that project, Molly McElwam and Kobe Sarpong. So they really took the lead on a lot of the sampling those first couple of years. And then we've also been collaborating with the different conservation districts across the state. So as we've kind of expanded this project, it's been a close collaboration also with various conservation districts and their staff to help us with identifying farmers where we can sample and choosing fields and actually getting the sampling done. So it started as a smaller effort with my team and then has expanded into this more kind of coordinated effort where we've also been trying to train various staff members across the state on, ways to sample for soil, what these soil health indicators are and how to sample for them, things like bulk density and probe samples. So there's also been kind of a training effort that's been part of it as well. We've given soil health reports to all of the growers that have participated. So that's been a way also to kind of just get people more familiar with these measurements and what they mean or what we think they mean, and just get more knowledge out there around soil health.
And what are the indicators that you're measuring on each of these samples?
Yeah, so we are doing a standard kind of soil fertility analysis, and then we're looking at total carbon, total organic carbon, mineralizable carbon, so respiration, permanganate oxidizable carbon, ACE proteins. So some of those kind of chemical indicators of biological activity. So I think the soil science world is still learning a lot about what those mean and how they might tie to functions. And then we, first, a subset of the samples, looking at some pathogens, so pathogen levels, plant parasitic nematodes. And then we also looked at some physical properties like water holding capacity and bulk density. And then we've archived samples. So we have put everything in the -80 freezer so that if other funding comes through, we could potentially do some sequencing, and there's already been interest in that. And we've gotten funding to look at the microbiome for the potato samples. So there's kind of sub-projects that can go on looking at some of the particular samples.
That must be a very full freezer.
It is, yes. And then you'd asked about kind of the agricultural tour of Washington. So Washington grows over 300 different commodity crops, and some that we are known for are wheat. So the Palouse region is one of the highest wheat producing areas in the world. And then there's also a big tree fruit production system, so apples particularly, but also cherries, and then wine grapes and juice grapes. And then potatoes as well. So potatoes are, the fifth largest crop in the state. Apples are the first in terms of revenue.
Huh.
And then there's also, things like hops, hay production, a lot of vegetable seed production, dairy. So it's really kind of important in a lot of different production systems. And so it's been fun to drive around the state and, get to talk with growers that are in so many different climatic zones and have, these really different cropping systems, and just learn about, what goals they have, what challenges they have in terms of soil, what they're doing and what they're thinking about. It's been really eye-opening.
What about berries?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so
No.
berries.
You're forgetting something.
There's a lot. Yeah, so berries are really important as well. So I'm located in Western Washington, and there's a lot of red raspberry and blueberry production in our area, and just north of us. Whatcom County, just north of us, is the largest producer of processed red raspberry in the country. So a lot of those frozen berries that you get. And then in Eastern Washington, there's also a lot of blueberry production as well, for the fresh market. And there's a lot of organic blueberry production over there as well.
Today's episode of the No-Till Market Garden podcast is brought to you by Johnny's Selected Seeds. Johnny's Selected Seeds is a proud sponsor of the No-Till Market Garden podcast. Since 1973, Johnny's has supported farmers and gardeners with superior seeds, tools, and information to help ensure their growing success and help feed their communities and families. The research farm is at the heart of Johnny's, where they trial thousands of varieties and tools every year. Their breeding program uniquely focuses on introducing varieties that meet the needs or solve the challenges mixed market, small farmers, and avid gardeners face. Visit johnnyseeds.com for innovative new varieties and time-tested favorites to grow this season. You can also browse their online growers library, link in the description, for a wealth of free educational resources. The employee owners at Johnny's look forward to growing with you. Today's episode is also brought to you by RIMOL Greenhouses.
Whether it's tomatoes to market, flowers in the spring, or your family's harvest, growing in a greenhouse protected from the weather provides the right environment that you need for a harvest that you can count on. RIMOL Greenhouses are designed for durability and offer the quality that you need to grow productively year-round. Visit rimolgreenhouses.com to get a quote today.
If I may editorialize for a second, I own a RIMOL tunnel. I love it. We built it ourselves, and I really appreciated the quality of the tunnel as well as the customer service we received in the process. So make sure to check them out. All right, back to the show.
So that kind of brings me to what I wanted to get into next, which is mulches and plastics. And I feel like I never wanted to get into plastics, but yet my dissertation, involved tarps and plastic. And it was always one of those things like, I feel so icky about this, but it's really hard. A lot of farming is really hard without plastic. And so you have gotten involved in some mulch projects. If you could talk a little bit about that, kind of the problem, what you all are doing, and the future.
Yeah.
That would be great.
Yeah. So plastic use is quite common in a lot of agricultural systems. And folks at WSU and at our center here have been doing work on biodegradable plastic mulch films for quite a number of years now. And that actually started focused on vegetable systems. So I didn't mention, but there's also a lot of diversified vegetable farms in Washington. And, plastic mulch use is fairly common there for weed suppression and holding on to soil moisture and heating up the soil, so it can really help with improving yields. But there's challenges with, what do you do with that plastic after you pull it off the soil? As we've talked about berries, it's also quite common in berries. Strawberry systems, red raspberry systems use it sometimes to help get the fields established. But there's, once you pull it off, it's quite labor intensive to go out and pull all that plastic mulch film off. And then there's challenges with, what do you do with it? Often it's contaminated with soil, so it can't be recycled easily. So I've been involved in some work focused on using soil biodegradable plastic mulches. And so these look like plastic, and they are often, have some petroleum-based material in them, but they are designed to be fully biodegradable in the soil. So basically, instead of going out and having to remove the plastic mulch, you would till it into the soil and incorporate it. And the work that has been going on at WSU and that I am now becoming involved in is looking at, how do these biodegradable plastic mulches perform compared to polyethylene mulches? So, are the yields just as good? What does the soil moisture look like? What does weed suppression look like? But then also, once they're incorporated into the soil, are they actually biodegrading? Are they having any other impacts on the soil that might be of concern? Are they, potentially ending up in the environment in kind of micro or nanoplastic form? So there's, a lot of promise with them, but then there's still a lot of questions to look at.
Yeah. So what are you finding in terms of their biodegradability?
Yeah. So there was a project that was put into place about 5 years ago that looked at several different biodegradable mulches, and it's hard to actually measure like the decomposition of it. So are they actually turning into microbial biomass and CO2, which is the end goal, that all of that carbon would actually be broken down completely by microbes. But you can measure the degradation of them in terms of, are they breaking up into smaller pieces? So there's sampling that we do where we collect, large amounts of soil and then sift through and try and find the pieces of the mulches and then measure their mass and area over time. So we find that they are indeed degrading, and the recoverable pieces are, less and less each year. And when that project was actively having mulches incorporated, there wasn't really accumulation. The degradation was keeping up with the inputs. But we did find that it took longer than we thought based on the kind of lab standard for biodegradability. So there's a lab standard, international standard that says that 90% of the material has to be degraded in over 2 years in kind of lab controlled conditions. And obviously in the field, we have very different conditions from you might have in the lab, where particularly in Washington, we have cooler temperatures. Sometimes things are drier. So we did find that it was taking, depending on the mulch, up to 2.5 times longer than you would expect in the lab. So one thing we've looked at is, well, maybe we shouldn't base it on, the number of months, but maybe we should base it on the number of degree days that have been accumulated and kind of that thermal time for looking at biodegradability.
And is it possible that these biodegradable mulches themselves are also just contributing to microplastic? Like you said, it's really hard to measure them or to measure their disappearance, whether they're actually being consumed and respired or if they're just getting smaller and smaller.
Right. Yeah, that is a major question. And other scientists, so I'm part of a specialty crop research initiative grant that is looking at this, focused on strawberry systems. And this is a multi-state project. We're collaborating with folks in California and Florida and Nebraska. And there are a team of folks looking at that question. So trying to actually measure the biodegradability and measure whether microplastics and nanoplastics from the biodegradable mulches are ending up in the soil and could end up in the environment. There's challenges with methods, since these mulches are carbon based, and there's a lot of carbon in our soils. It's hard to distinguish. If you do chemical measurements, it's sometimes hard to distinguish between what's a small piece of a mulch that we can't see with our naked eye and what's just organic matter. But they're doing a lot of method development to really actually try and trace the mulches and see if it's ending up in that microbial biomass and CO2.
This project that you mentioned has a really great newsletter that you shared with me, and it even looks like they have started a podcast too, which is cool.
Yeah,
I didn't listen to that yet, but
Mulch Matters is the
Mulch Matters. And how do you you sent me the newsletter, but is that like publicly available as well? Okay. We'll include that in the show notes.
Great.
But one of the things in the most recent edition that I thought was really interesting is some folks trying to address this problem that I think will resonate with a lot of listeners, which is that there are currently no OMRI approved biodegradable mulches. And so biodegradable mulches are still out of the possibility for organic growers. So I was wondering if you could just touch on this work looking at lignocellulosic films.
Yes. So as you mentioned, the biodegradable plastic mulches are not organic certified. And the group that I'm collaborating with here, who's led by Dr. Lisa DeVetter, they've had a lot of back and forth with the National Organic Standards Board, kind of summarizing the research on soil biodegradable plastic mulches, kind of give them information on what we found in terms of impacts on soil or lack of impacts on soil. But so there's these other options that are 100% bio-based and could be organic certified. So lignocellulosic film is one option, and then hydromulches are another. So lignocellulosic films use plant biomass, so things like wood chips that are ground up. And then in some cases they use biochar, which is, so carbon black is used in a lot of biodegradable plastic mulches. And in this case, they're using biochar to create this kind of film. They mix it and grind it with the wood chips, hydrate it, and then dissolve it, and can create actually these sheets that are very similar looking to polyethylene or biodegradable plastic mulches. So there's promise there, and there's work going on to look at, how effective they are in terms of, how well they hold up in these systems, and then their various properties and how well they're going to be used in these systems. And then hydromulches are another option that are, again, you derived solely from cellulosic material, and then some kind of binders. So things like recycled paper pulp or cotton or straw can be mixed with a tackifier or something that acts like a glue to bind the fibers together. And that could be a variety of materials like xanthan gum or psyllium or lignin. And then these are designed to be wetted and sprayed onto the soil surface. And then there's work going on right now by one of Dr. Lisa DeVetter's students at our center, looking at different properties like density, porosity, soil adhesion, carbon to nitrogen ratios, and how well they hold up in terms of like tensile strength and puncture resistance. So there's some promising options on the horizon there that people are actively doing research on.
And what kind of, for the hydromulches, what kind of equipment do you need? Or it's probably different now since it's just kind of in development than what, people might come up with a few years from now. But does that seem like a technology that will be available for smaller scale growers or just for larger scale folks?
I don't know too much about the equipment. I think that the goal is that it would be available for smaller scale folks. And the research that that's currently going on now at the center is on a smaller scale. So I think it would be fairly easy to adapt the equipment that's being used for those smaller research trials to smaller scale growers.
Yeah, I'm super, super excited about these alternatives. It's one area where I feel like I've always said, this would be so cool, but I'm not a material scientist, and this is not my thing. So it's really neat to see that people are doing it, and I could definitely envision, like, I know for this subset of smaller scale producers, using the thicker plastic, not the films, but the silage tarps, and landscape fabric and stuff like that is more common. And the benefits are that sure, it can last a long time. You could use it for 5, maybe even 10 years, but then you still have this massive amount of plastic that you have to dispose of. And I wonder if there's some of these things that like your group is working on, not just films, but could be done in a thicker way so that it could be a reusable, but then inevitably, at the end of life, compostable material. And that would be, even not just for the small scale vegetable growers, but like all those dairy farmers who use the reason silage tarps were invented in the first place. And so that's pretty exciting that people are working on these alternatives to plastic.
Yeah, I think so. This particular project is really focused on the mulches, but we have material scientists and companies that are creating these projects as part of our advisory team and as part of the project. So, and there has been discussion about like, well, what about all the other plastic uses in agriculture? Things like you mentioned with tarps, or but also like drip tape. What is the potential for biodegradability in those materials? So I think there's a lot of discussion about it, and it's good to address mulches, but there's also a lot of other plastic use in agriculture that we need to address as well. And it is interesting, the different thicknesses and colors and different uses require different, types of material and different kind of characteristics. So that's been something also as the projects have moved from vegetable production to berry production where it's, perennial. There's been some changes that have been needed in terms of thickness and, because those mulch films now need to last for longer than just one growing season in the summer.
Right.
So there's, these companies that are helping to create these products are used to having to kind of adapt to different types of systems and uses.
You mentioned the color. What are some of the things going on with color?
Yeah, so I mentioned that we're collaborating with growers in California, and in California, they actually are moving towards using green plastic mulches. So they're kind of dark green instead of black. And so that was really important to the growers there, that if they were going to use a soil biodegradable option, that it matched that color that they're using in the polyethylene mulch. So in our trial, we have a couple of black options and then a couple of dark green options. And we actually, interestingly, found this year, this was the first season of this trial, but the green ones actually degraded much more quickly. So there's two feedstocks that we're testing, and one of them was comparable to the unmulched control in terms of weeds and yield. So that one didn't fare very well. And then the other one still did a little bit better, but still degraded more quickly than the black ones. And I think there's that carbon black that's in the black materials that is somehow helping with that resistance to degradation while the mulch is on the soil surface.
And what is is it heat that's the primary reason why they're switching? Like, I've been thinking about surface albedo a lot. And so what are growers' primary reason for shifting to green?
My understanding is it's more aesthetics than actual like heat absorption, but that's just what I've heard from kind of secondhand. Yeah.
That's I'm like, oh, there must be a reason, and that's interesting that is the reason. Huh. Well, that makes sense. I think people probably don't like looking at black plastic, so green looks less plasticky. That's funny. All right. So you mentioned, I know that's not your primary research, and I appreciate you taking the time to talk about it because I think it's really important work, and I hope the project is successsul. It seems like it's very well organized, and I really liked the newsletter.
It is, and I'll say that it is a great team, and there's a lot of different players, social scientists and economics and material science. So yeah, check out our newsletter and our podcast. There's a lot of good information coming out about this project, and we're just in the first year of a 4-year project.
Nice. So you mentioned back to your kind of roots and interest in nutrition, that you were also working on some alternative crops and that relationship between soil health and nutritional quality and just different crops. So what's going on there?
Yeah, so I'm part of a couple of grants focused on that. One is a USDA Sustainable Ag Systems grant that's led by Dr. Kevin Murphy. He is a plant breeder at Washington State University, and that's a big team effort. It's called the Soil to Society Project, and we're really looking at cereals and pseudo cereals. So those include wheat and barley, but also things like buckwheat and quinoa and some pulses as well. So garbanzos and lentils. And so that project it's a large team effort. There's folks that, like in my team, that were focused on the soils and the cropping systems. So how these crops are being grown, are there ways to farm them where we can actually increase the nutritional quality of the grain? So things like, amino acid profiles, zinc and iron concentrations. And then there's a big breeding effort as well. So folks like Kevin and others that are looking at breeding cultivars or varieties that are higher in, particularly zinc and iron is a big focus. And then also complete amino acid profiles for some like quinoa. And then we also have food scientists, food engineers, population health people, nutritionists. We have a gut microbiome scientist on that project. So really trying to trace these crops and from, integrating them into our cropping systems in ways where they might actually contribute to soil quality. And I can talk about that more in a second. But then also trying to create, more markets for them in creating food products that will be accessible to people, and then actually testing, are these food products having an impact on nutrition in populations, and also doing some work to kind of understand why people choose certain products and why they might or might not choose whole grain products. So it's a big effort, and it's exciting to be a part of. And then, so our work particularly is focused on, one, how wheat and barley are used a lot in our area as rotational crops, but we're actually trying to quantify like what impact they're having on the rotation. Is that residue increasing organic matter? Are there different varieties that could be used and integrated to help with soil quality? We're also looking at some perennial wheat that's in development. And then we're looking at alternative grain crops or pseudo cereals like buckwheat. There's a lot of anecdotal evidence that buckwheat can help with soil quality. People have said, after a buckwheat crop, they really notice there's really good soil tilth, and they also notice that weed pressure might be down. So we're actually trying to look at that in vegetable rotations. Can we integrate buckwheat, and what effect is it having on the soil in that rotation? So those are some things we're looking at. And then
harvesting it for grain.
For grain,
yeah.
Yes. So it's not being used as a cover crop. I know it's fairly common as a cover crop in a lot of places, but this is actually taking it to grain and harvesting it for the seed.
And you said pseudo grains. I think you said pseudo grains and grains. Can you distinguish there?
Yeah, so buckwheat would be considered a pseudo cereal. It's not actually. It's I think just botanically, it's not actually a cereal, but it's often used, in flours. It's used in that way in a lot of places. Used as a grain, but I think botanically it's not. I think that would be the only one that's actually considered a pseudo cereal, except for the pulses, of course, which are legumes, but are again maybe also sometimes used in that way.
What are you finding with quinoa? Are you finding that it is that it's a viable crop in your area?
Yeah, I think there's potential for it. And I think, growers in this area are interested in kind of expanding their potential rotational crops. There's some challenges with having it be a crop that one of my grad students, Evan Domsick, is trying to address. So one aspect is there's saponins on the quinoa that have to be processed. So those saponins, it's kind of a bitter seed coating that needs specific processing for it to be marketed. And there's, a lot of small scale growers wouldn't have access to that processing, and even larger scale growers might not. So he's looking at some varieties that have been bred to not have those saponins. They're kind of called sweet varieties versus bitter varieties. And he's looking at, how well they do in the field, and then also what impacts they have on pest resistance. So we think that the saponins are involved in helping protect the crop from pests. So he's looking at pests both in the field and in storage, and actually finding that those sweet varieties are much more susceptible to pest infestations and pest pressure in the field. So that's one thing he's looking at. Early pre-harvest sprouting is an issue with quinoa as well. And in our area, we can have a fairly dry fall, or we can have a very wet fall, and that can be a big problem. So he is looking at varieties that are bred to not have as much pre-harvest sprouting. And then he's also looking at swathing and how well that might do in terms of helping to kind of get the quinoa senescing sooner, and what impact that has on yield if it's done at different time periods. So he's looking at that. And then we're also looking at understanding, good fertilization practices for quinoa. There hasn't been as much work done on, appropriate fertilization for quinoa as there has been with wheat, for example. So we're looking at different organic fertilizer rates and different carbon to nitrogen ratio fertilizers, and looking at the impact that has on nitrogen cycling and availability, and then crop uptake, and then also looking at the amino acid profiles in the quinoa grain.
Yeah, so quinoa typically does not have complete amino acid.
So it's supposed to. So often it does, and I think it's often advertised as being a complete protein and having all 14 essential amino acids. I think it's 14. It's been a while since I took that nutrition science class, but we've found that in some cases, depending on where it's grown, it might be lacking in some of those, like leucine might be lower in some places. So we've also been trying to look at, are there environmental factors that are playing a role in the amino acid profiles in the grain.
Nice. That brings me back to forage radish and sulfur and Ray. I feel like we couldn't go this whole conversation without mentioning Ray Weil. Who was our professor mentor at Maryland.
He actually got me. He was like the first one that got me really interested in amino acids and sulfur-containing amino acids. Yeah. I remember he did a lot of work on dry beans and looking at
cysteine and methionine.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I thought that was so interesting, and I still think
I still do. Oh my gosh. Okay. Yeah. It's one of my back burner things. I definitely want to get back to sulfur, the underappreciated element. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, I guess just finally, kind of what's next for you? You have a lot going on. But is there, I'm like, I can handle about 2 things at once, and you have about 10, but, yeah, what's next for you? Is there something that, is really exciting, or just going to keep plugging away on what you're doing?
Just gonna keep plugging away. I mean, we do have a lot of different projects going on that are very different from one another. So it's been really, sometimes my brain hurts, but it's really exciting to be able to work in so many different crops and cropping systems and questions, and collaborate with so many people. And I have really amazing technicians and grad students that, keep everything running day to day. And so it's pretty great. And I think, I'm really excited to see how things progress with the Soil Health Initiative and our long-term site. I'm really excited about that. And I think, we're just in our first couple of years of this long-term trial, but I think there's some really exciting things we're going to see on the horizon with that as we continue to monitor it. And then for our state of the soils assessment, we're bringing on a postdoc in the spring to really tackle that data set. And we're thinking about, how are there different soil health zones within the state that we need to define so that we can, where soils and climate might be similar to help guide, tracking soil health over time. And there's just a lot of data there that can be tackled and I think there's a lot of things we can get out of it. So I'm really excited about that. And then, just excited to be involved in a lot of efforts in the state to help growers adopt new practices or just help kind of credit them for the work they're already doing. We are launching in the state the STAR program, which is called Saving Tomorrow's Agricultural Resources. And this is a program that's been established already in Illinois and Colorado, and it's now being brought to Washington State.
I was going to ask if that was copyrighted or if we can use that acronym. Can anyone use that acronym?
There's a National STAR program now, so it might be taken. But I'm on the science committee for that effort. It's being led by folks at the State Department of Ag, but it's exciting to be part of that and just help develop a system where farmers that are being innovative or are already adopting, practices that might improve soil health can market themselves and show what they're doing and hopefully get some economic benefit from it.
Nice. Well, it's good work. Thank you for talking with me.
Yeah, thank you for.
I'm glad we can make this happen.
For chatting. Absolutely.
And one of these days we'll get out there to visit, I hope.
Yes, and one of these days we'll collaborate again too.
Yeah, I know. All right, bye. Thanks again to Deirdre for taking the time to talk with me and to all of you for listening. It's so funny, we never talk on the phone. Who talks on the phone? So that was really nice. And I'm excited to follow up in a couple years on some of this research, especially the idea of using sustainably harvested forest materials or other bioproducts as mulch. And I'm also really inspired by Washington's dedication to soil health. If you're interested, you can find a map online of all the states that have passed or have pending soil health legislation. And if you're interested in getting involved in policy, but feel like the federal level is not as functional as you'd like, states really do seem to be taking the lead on this, which is cool. I have some more great interviews lined up for this season, but I also have some room for suggestions. So if there's someone you'd like me to get in touch with, please let us know.
I hope you enjoyed that episode. Real quick, some things that we have going on. In case you missed it, we posted Mimi episodes on both Christmas Day and New Year's Day because, well, nerds are going to nerd no matter the occasion. But in case you missed those, they were amazing, and I highly recommend going back and catching up on them. We also have the No-Till Growers Forum alive and well over at no-tillgrowers.com that you can visit and discuss all things no-till. Here are a few places you can find me this winter of 2024. Later this week, in fact, you can find me at the Utah Food and Farm Conference at the Red Acre Center in Utah. Register ASAP for that one because it's literally coming up this week. Of course, as always, I will be at the Organic Association of Kentucky conference called Oak, here like 15 minutes from my home farm at the end of January. The Dallas Inner City Grower Symposium is being moved to the summer, but I am still doing an event in mid-February there. in Dallas with the Dallas Inner City Growers. It will be a much more Farmer Jesse-centric no-till workshop, and thus also rad. So I hope to see you all there. Check the show notes for details on that. I will be at Marble Seed in Wisconsin later that same month in February, and then finally wrapping up my winter conferencing at the very awesome Organic Grower School outside of Asheville, North Carolina in March. All the links for those will be in the show notes, and also linked in the show notes is our shop, where you can find my book, The Living Soil Handbook, and hats and other merch. Purchasing those things helps support our work, so it's really important, and we really appreciate it. Alternatively, you can join the hundreds of donors who support us through patreon.com/no-till-growers. That is the absolute lifeblood of our work, and at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another, just go from nematode to whatever the one is above that, you get a shout out on the show. So big shout outs this week to Brian Newton, Tyler Rollins, Abraham, Hank Zecca, Chris Yates, Jill Crosby, Stephen Wilder, Rob Soma, Sean at All About the Garden, Joseph Sanguinetti, Danny Rodriguez, Alex Savatsky, Pear Tree Hill Farm, Stephanie and Alex, Stephen Smith, Alberto Diaz, Jason Ruel, Scott Harris, Earth Care Farmer Jane Murner Clement, Grown Up Farm, Bob and Ann Patton of Hexenshire Organics, Jared Kirst at Rivendell Farm, Dan Brisebois, Steve Larson, Fiona and Donnie of Firefly Farm, and the great Jen Lawrence. Huge shout out to everyone who supports us in whatever way that you can. You all are amazing. Otherwise, thanks for listening. We'll catch you next week. Bye.